Hello, and thank you for your participation in this Construction Change Directive training, also called a CCD. The purpose of this Construction Change Directive presentation is to provide step-by-step instructions for project managers from initiation to approval. The Change Management Flowchart highlights where in the process, your owner's representative will review and authorize the proposed CCD submittal. The table of contents is listed on this slide. You can navigate through the table of contents by selecting the bookmarks in the comment area below. What is a Construction Change Directive, CCD? The CCD documents and authorizes project funds from the provisional allowance for changes in work due to various issues, such as unforeseen conditions and owner-directed additions, deletions, etc. There are 6 steps that are required to process a CCD. 1. Prepare a comprehensive, unambiguous and enforceable scope description of the task. 2. Determine whether lump sum, unit price or time and material is more beneficial to GLWA. 3. Obtain a quote from the contractor. 4. Review and negotiate quote. 5. Prepare a construction change directive and receive approval before starting each task. 6. Scope of CCD must be related to scope of base contract. It is recommended to avoid scope creep by adding non-related items to your project. The CCD form is required to be completed with the following details: the scope of work and reason the work is required. For example, is this an owner-directed request or unforeseen condition? Unit price, time and material or lump sum budget amount. Funding source for this CCD, contract, account number, specific allowance, etc. Contract and or allowance initial amount, prior additions or subtractions, and amount remaining after subtracting the not to exceed value of this CCD. Waiver language. Contractor signature and GLWA approval signatures in accordance with procurement policy and dollar amount to be authorized. An additional CCD is required for a task when additional funding is required, there remains an unused balance, or task is no longer required. A CCD can include more than one task. Payments cannot be made from an allowance without an executed CCD. At completion, a final change order that establishes the final balance in each CCD work item and credits out all remaining amounts. This final step is critical part of closing out the project. The administration of a CCD can be found in Article 12 of GLWA's construction contract. The next slides will refer to critical sections. In addition, our procurement policy stipulates that a CCD shall not be used to extend the substantial completion and or final completion dates. The contract dates can only be extended by an authorized change order and approved by GLWA's Board of Directors. General Conditions, GC 12.2.6. The contractor shall produce, and shall cause any subcontractors to produce, any and all data which GLWA may reasonably request for the purpose of determining the correctness of the charges. GC 12.3.1. GLWA shall, at all times, have the right to order changes in the work to be performed on the basis of 1. A lump sum proposal as provided in Section 12.3.3. 2. A unit price basis as provided in Section 12.3.4. Or 3. Actual cost of the changes, plus a fee. GC 12.3.3. If any of the changed work included in the lump sum proposal is covered by unit prices, GLWA may elect to use these unit prices within the lump sum proposal. No overhead and profit may be applied to unit prices. GC 12.3.5. The contractor will submit to GLWA daily time and material tickets for all changed work, including changed work performed by subcontractors. These tickets will include the identification number assigned to this work. the location and description of the changed work, the classification of labor employed including the applicable subcontractor workers' names and social security numbers, the materials used, the equipment rented, excluding tools, and any other information ordered by the contracting officer. GC 12.3.6. The term actual cost of the changes means the sum of all costs necessarily incurred and paid by the contractor in the proper performance of the changed work. All such costs shall be in amounts no higher than those prevailing in the locality of the work. The following costs shall constitute recoverable actual cost of the changes to which the contractor is entitled when performing extra or change work. GC 12.3.8. The contractor shall maintain and submit daily records of labor, material and equipment used in the changed work, which have been acknowledged thereon daily by the contracting officer. The contractor shall certify all time and records and invoices. Keep and present in such form as the contracting officer may direct itemized accounting together with supporting data and vouchers of all actual costs associated with the extra or changed work. When utilizing the time and material method to process a CCD, the contractor is responsible for supplying daily records of all material, labor hours by trade, and equipment used on the project and certified by GLWA site representative. Furthermore, the contractor cost proposal shall contain invoices from all supplier equipment providers listed in the CCD. Time and material billing requires the considerable effort by both the contractor and GLWA to verify the invoices are accurate. Therefore, at a minimum the following items should be provided: description of work performed and location, worker name, trade, position, for example, John Jones, carpenter journeyman, hours worked segregated by straight time, overtime or double time, descriptions and quantities of all materials used, construction equipment used, hours working, hours idle, model number and year, and any attachments being billed, contractor's signature, and signature of GLWA representative, after correction of sheet or annotation of any areas of disagreement. While reviewing the time and material sheets, pay attention that no contract work is included. For example, a section of piping was demolished and added to the time and materials sheet, however, the section of pipe was shown in the contract documents as demolished. Therefore the time and materials sheets require careful analysis. T&M sheets must isolate the issue being captured, shall not include work performed to complete base contract work, unit price work, correction of defective work. Owner's signature shall not be an agreement to costs recorded on the sheet but rather an agreement on quantities and hours. Issue separate clarifying correspondence if required. Supporting documentation is required for the project manager analysis and before final approval. Therefore, the contractor shall provide the following items: materials invoices, invoices for any rented construction equipment, recap sheet summarizing and pricing hours by trade position, materials and construction equipment, applicable collective bargaining agreement, substantiation of workers' compensation rate, and justification for insurance rates. To document the work performed, the project manager, or the project representative, is responsible for initiating the CCD, verifying work, and gathering the documentation necessary to support approval of the CCD. In addition to the contractor keeping their daily records, GLWA site representative should maintain the following records: work performed, number of workers, materials brought on site, unit price quantities installed, and construction equipment on site, by manufacturer and model number. Furthermore, GLWA site representative can cross-check GLWA daily records with the contractor's daily logs to ensure the following: The work performed and hours expended are accurately represented. Hours charged must comply with collective bargaining agreement otherwise agreed to actual costs. Show up time. When overtime or double time is applicable. When breaks are paid or unpaid. Confirm that late starts early quits are properly recorded. Confirm that only individuals on site are included on the time and materials sheet. Segregate and monitor any off-site labor, for example, at contractor fab shop. Do not sign for construction equipment not required for the work being performed. Contract compliance is essential for all parties and the project manager should be aware of the following. Do not sign for costs excluded under the contract, for example, tools, some non-manual labor, etc. Do not sign for labor allocations or percentages for cost items beyond the actual labor present on site, for example, warehousing, material handling, consumables, small tools, etc. Avoid simultaneous unit price work and time and materials work by the same crew if possible. If unavoidable, careful observation required. Note observed split between the two types of work. Isolate tool and equipment require for non-T&M work. No prorating a percentage of base contract work if costs would have been otherwise incurred, for example mobilization demobilization. In addition, the project manager shall ensure the labor rates provided by the contractor shall be fair and reasonable, and in compliance with the contract. In general, unless the contractor employee is directly employed on the job, their costs is included in the contractor's markup. GLWA should not be billed for project managers, accountants and other indirect office costs. General Conditions, GC, 12.3.6.1. Payroll costs for employees of the contractor directly employed in the physical performance of the work. Payroll costs shall include salaries or wages paid plus the cost of itemized fringe benefits, including Social Security contributions, unemployment and workers' compensation insurance, and vehicle parking costs. The payroll costs associated with premiums paid for performing the work after regular hours. Weekends or holidays shall be allowed only to the extent that these costs have been approved in writing by the contracting officer. Check wages and fringe benefits against collective bargaining agreement and certified payroll, if submitted. Rates vary by trade, labor classification, for example, apprentice, journeyman, foreman, general foreman, work performed, shift, and straight time, overtime, double time. Note that some fringe benefits are per hour worked and some are per hour paid. Percentages for fringes, taxes and insurance apply to taxable base wage rate, not to fringe benefits. Federal Insurance Contributions Act, FICA, employers' Social Security Medicare tax, at 7.65% of base wage. State Unemployment Tax Act, SUTA, tax, applicable to first $9,000 of each employee's annual wages. Rate is based on contractor's unemployment experience. Industry average is 7.3%. Example, construction labor $9,000 times 7.3% divided by $51,168 annual pay equals 1.3%. Contractor's rate could be somewhat higher to the extent turnover prevents workers from working a full year. A rate of 2% would not be unreasonable. Federal unemployment insurance, after credit for SUTA, 0.6% on first $7,000 of each employee's annual wages. Example, construction laborer $7,000 times 0.6% divided by $51,168 annual pay equals 0.08%. Contractor's rate could be somewhat higher to the extent turnover prevents workers from working a full year. A rate of 0.2% would not be unreasonable. Add workers' compensation, if substantiation is not submitted by contractor. CRS means, received standards, table by trade and state. Labor rate example of a collective bargaining agreement, CBA. Labor rate, RS means example. Labor rate, RS means example. Here is labor rate example in an acceptable format, with wages items with sufficient detail for a detailed analysis. A common misconception is for overtime and double time rates to be simply multiplied by 1.5 and 2 respectively. However, rate for overtime is significantly less than 1.5 straight time. Rate for double is significantly less than 2.0 straight time. Payroll information should be gathered on larger efforts to verify contractor assertions. GLWA can request actual payroll records to verify payment when items that are not included in labor rate, small tools, PPE, overhead, and profit. Furthermore, the project manager shall verify all material quantities and supplier invoices are fair and reasonable. Material costs should be thoroughly reviewed for the following. Actual quantities utilized is recorded on time and material sheets. Unit prices supported by invoices. Confirm that prices are reasonable. Any applicable discounts. If the contractor receives discounts, those savings should be passed on to GLWA. Freight charges and applicable sales use tax actually paid by contractor. Currently, all contractors are required to pay sales taxes. Rental equipment often represents a significant cost of our projects. Therefore, when submitting rental equipment cost, the contractor shall provide the best cost based on duration. Additionally, the project manager shall verify that the rates are within industry standards. The GLWA site representative shall document the equipment on site, whether idle or utilized, on a daily basis. General Conditions, GC 12.3.6.6. Construction equipment costs of the contractor's equipment or rental costs from others hourly, daily, weekly or monthly rates will be applied where appropriate. GC 12.3.3. Equipment rental may be included only if the equipment will be required on the project site for a longer duration, solely because of the changed work. Include only equipment required and being actively used for the current work. Rates for equipment rented from third parties unrelated to the contractor paid at invoiced cost. Contractor-owned equipment paid based on Equipment Watch Blue Book rate for the make, model and year of that piece of equipment. Pay only for the period that the equipment is required for the time and materials work. For intermittent work, evaluate idle equipment cost versus mob demo cost. Unless the equipment is brought to the job and not needed in less than 3 weeks, pay at the FHWA hourly ownership rate, that is, monthly ownership rate excluding operating costs /176. If equipment is brought to the job and no longer needed after 3 days or less, pay at the FHWA daily ownership rate. If equipment is brought to the job and no longer needed after 3 days but before 3 weeks, pay at the FHWA weekly ownership rate. Equipment rates. Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, rates. Only for equipment used on project specifically for changed work. If equipment already on site or will remain on site following change work, use monthly rate. In addition to the ownership rate, pay the hourly operating rate for the hours that the equipment is being operated for the time and materials work. Prorate if the equipment is used for both unit price and time and materials work. Ownership and operating costs of equipment accessories are also payable, for example, hoses for a pump. Equipment that is idle is paid at half the FHWA ownership rate, without any operating rate. Equipment used on overtime is paid at half the FHWA ownership rate plus the operating rate. Mobilization/demobilization costs are payable for equipment brought to the job only for the time and materials work. Different rules apply to custom equipment purchased specifically for the project, for example, a tunnel boring machine. Equipment rates. Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, rates example. Our contract stipulates that the subcontractor shall provide the same level of cost proposal detail as required for the prime contractor. General Conditions, GC, 12.3.6.4. Payments made by the contractor to subcontractors for work performed. All subcontractor recoverable costs shall be determined in the same manner as the contractor's recoverable costs. GC 12.3.3. The subcontractors may include in their labor proposal only those workmen directly involved in the changed work. All other supervision is included in the percentages for overhead and profit allowed the subcontractors, unless 1. Additional foremen are required in connection with the changed work who were not otherwise on the project site. Subcontractors' material costs will include invoiced costs, transportation and applicable sales or use taxes. All subcontractor costs must be detailed sufficiently for evaluation. Same requirements for labor, materials and construction equipment costs apply to subcontractors. Contractors, subconsultants and engineers will price differently, consistent with professional services or engineering contracts. Contractor markups on these services limited to 5%. More in sections to follow. No additional fee on multipliers. Fee is embedded in multiplier. In the event of unusual circumstances, such as an emergency condition, the contractor may request reimbursement for costs not originally included in the contract scope. General Conditions, GC, 12.3.6.5. Sales, consumer, use or similar taxes related to the work, and for which the contractor is liable, or are otherwise imposed by laws and regulations. GC 12.3.6.7. Other supplemental costs which are substantiated by the contractor as specifically being required for the proper execution of the extra or changed work, unless specifically prohibited by Section 12.3.7 below. Not recoverable, GC 12.3.7.1. Payroll costs and other compensation of the contractor's officers, executives, principals, general managers, project managers, construction managers, engineers, architects, estimators, attorneys, auditors, accountants, purchasing or contracting agents, expediters, clerks, or any other employees or agents who are not specifically employed full-time on the work. Those employees or agents not employed full-time on the work are to be considered administrative costs which are covered by the contract price. GC 12.3.7.2. Expenses of the contractor's principal and branch offices other than the contractor's office located at the project site. GC 12.3.7.3. Any part of the contractor's capital expenses, including interest on the contractor's capital employed for the work and charges against the contractor for delinquent payments. GC 12.3.7.5. Additional vehicle parking costs which exceed the parking reimbursement allowable within the payroll cost as provided in Section 12.3.6. GC 12.3.7.6. Any other supplemental costs which are not substantiated by the contractor as specifically being required for the proper execution of the extra or changed work. Examples: permit costs and insurance. While reviewing the cost proposal, the project manager shall ensure that the markup percentage is not greater than allowed in our contract. The contract will provide the appropriate markups and the project manager should be aware that these may vary from project to project. Therefore, while processing a CCD, a review of the relevant contract sections is required. The contractor, self-performing, subcontractor or subcontractor performing the changed work shall be permitted to include in the estimate not more than 15% for overhead and profit. The contractor and subcontractors of a higher tier shall be permitted to include in the estimate a handling charge of not more than 5%. Use of small tools is included in the overhead and profit. Overhead and profit, as outlined above, includes all other costs whatsoever beyond those enumerated. No overhead and profit may be applied to unit prices. No person performing any portion of the change in the work will be allowed a fee for overhead and profit on the premium time wages paid for overtime, shift time, or other similar types of work conditions on which premium time wages may be paid. Also, the overhead and profit of the contractor, subcontractor, subcontractor shall always be calculated on the cost of performing the work. Markups for the upper-tier contractor, subcontractor, subcontractor will not be calculated on the lower-tier subcontractor, subcontractor's markups. We all make mistakes. It is critical that all CCDs are checked for mathematical errors through each step within the process. A cross-check of all calculations will reduce the errors in the CCD and shorten the approval time. Therefore, check the following: total hours from approved timesheets for each labor trade and classification. Applicable actual wage rates times total hours for each trade classification. Total quantity of each material item from approved timesheets. Applicable unit price times material item quantity. Applicable sales tax and freight. Total equipment usage hours from approved timesheets by make model. Applicable equipment hourly ownership and operating cost rates times hours used. Total and cross-foot to total figures horizontally across columns instead of vertically. Reconcile to contractor's billing to identify variances. Requires contractor to correct all errors in its billing before processing for payment same item. There shall be no adjustment, equitable or otherwise, to unit prices established in subcontracts. Unit prices, if any, shall be established through the bidding process and strictly adhered to thereafter, even if a change in quantity is made. In instances where new unit prices are proposed for new work in a CCD, a detailed proposal shall be submitted and negotiated. After the CCD is approved, the new unit prices may be applied for future work on this project. Our contract provides detailed instructions whenever unit prices are applied. General Conditions 12.3.4. Unit prices. Should GLWA elect to have changed work performed on a unit price basis, the contractor will submit, with reasonable promptness but in any event within the time period set forth in subparagraph 12.2.3. Hereof, a written proposal itemizing the quantities of each item of changed work for which there is an applicable unit price contained in the agreement, contract documents or applicable subcontracts. The quantities must be itemized in relation to each specific item in the contract documents. The unit prices will also be applied to net increases in quantities of the same item. The unit prices will also be applied to net decreases in quantities of the same item. There shall be no adjustment, equitable or otherwise, to unit prices established in subcontracts. Unit prices, if any, shall be established through the bidding process and strictly adhered to thereafter, even if a change in quantity is made. Unit prices must be applied to the actual quantity delivered, not adjusted to artificially change the unit price based on difficulty of work performed. The scope of work for each unit price item must be as described in the table of unit prices. Cost shall be the unit price times the actual quantity performed in the unit of measure, provided in the table of unit prices. If unit prices for allowance work are not reflective of actual cost and risk to perform the work, consider requiring lump sum or time and materials. If you have questions, or need additional guidance, feel free to contact your owner's representative at ownersrep@glwater.org. Thank you for participating in this presentation. Have a great day.